What would you do if the person you loved most in the world had a secret so shocking it shattered everything you thought you knew? For Marcus Johnson, the truth about his wife, Ebony, wasn't just a betrayal, it was a revelation so devastating it ended in a brutal, bloody murder. This is the chilling true story of a marriage built on lies, a secret that couldn't stay buried, and a crime so horrific it left an entire community in shock. Strap in, because this is one story you won't believe until you hear it for yourself.
Before we dive into this chilling case, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Here we unravel the most gripping true crime cases, exposing the darkest secrets and shocking twists. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. The story begins in Houston, Texas, a city known for its sprawling neighborhoods, diverse communities, and southern charm. It was here, in a quiet suburban area, that Marcus Johnson and Ebony Davis first crossed paths. Marcus, a 32-year-old construction worker, was a man of traditional values. Raised in a conservative household, he took pride in his work, his family, and his role as a provider. He was the kind of man who believed in honesty, loyalty, and the sanctity of marriage. His friends often described him as a protector, someone who would go to great lengths to care for those he loved. Ebony, on the other hand, was a 28-year-old hairstylist with a magnetic personality. She was tall, strikingly beautiful, and had a warmth that drew people to her. Her clients adored her, and her friends admired her confidence and charm. But beneath her radiant exterior, Ebony carried a secret, one that she had guarded for years. Born Elijah Davis, she had undergone a gender transition in her early 20s, a journey that had been both liberating and fraught with challenges. She had moved to Houston to start anew, hoping to leave her past behind and build a life where she could be her true self. Their meeting was serendipitous, occurring at a community event organized by their local church. Marcus was immediately captivated by Ebony's beauty and charisma, and Ebony found Marcus's rugged charm and strong work ethic irresistible. Their courtship was swift and intense. Within months, Marcus was introducing Ebony to his family, and she quickly won them over with her kindness and grace. Friends and family often remarked on how perfect they seemed together, like a couple straight out of a romance novel. But even in those early days, there were subtle signs of tension. Marcus's conservative upbringing occasionally clashed with Ebony's more progressive views. She would sometimes challenge his beliefs, gently pushing him to see the world from a different perspective. Marcus, for his part, admired her confidence, but found himself uncomfortable with some of her opinions. Still, he brushed these moments aside, convinced that their love was strong enough to overcome any differences. Their wedding was a grand affair, held at the historic Houston Baptist Church. Over 200 guests attended, and the ceremony was nothing short of magical. Marcus stood at the altar, his heart pounding as he watched Ebony walk down the aisle in a shimmering white gown. She looked like a vision, and Marcus felt like the luckiest man alive. But even on their wedding day, there were subtle signs of unease. Ebony's hands trembled slightly as they exchanged vows, and her gaze occasionally drifted as if she were lost in thought. Marcus brushed it off as wedding day nerves, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Their honeymoon in the Caribbean was a dream come true, or so it seemed. Marcus had spared no expense, booking a luxurious resort where they could relax and enjoy each other's company. But despite the idyllic setting, Marcus noticed that Ebony seemed distant at times. She would withdraw into herself, her eyes taking on a faraway look. When Marcus asked her what was wrong, she would smile and reassure him that everything was fine. "Just a little stressed," she would say, wrapping her arms around him. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling him. After the honeymoon, they settled into their new life together in a cozy home on the outskirts of Houston. Marcus worked long hours on construction sites, while Ebony focused on growing her beauty business. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But as the weeks turned into months, Marcus began to notice subtle changes in Ebony's behavior. She became more secretive, locking her phone and disappearing for hours at a time without explanation. She started working late, claiming she had more clients, but when Marcus dropped by the salon to surprise her, he often found it empty. The excuses piled up, meetings with friends he'd never heard of, phone calls she would take in hushed tones. Marcus's suspicions grew, but he didn't want to believe that something was wrong. He loved Ebony deeply, and the thought of her keeping something from him felt like a knife twisting in his gut. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Marcus came home to find Ebony sitting on the couch, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Ebony hesitated, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus sat down beside her, his heart racing. "Whatever it is, we'll get through it together," he said, taking her hand in his. But Ebony couldn't bring herself to say the words. The fear of losing him was too great. Instead, she shook her head and forced a smile. "It's nothing," she said, brushing away her tears. "Just a rough day at work." Marcus wanted to believe her, but the nagging feeling in the back of his mind refused to go away. The tension between them continued to grow, and Marcus found himself increasingly consumed by doubt. He began to question everything: her late nights, her secretive behavior, the way she sometimes seemed to pull away from him. He tried to push these thoughts aside, convincing himself that he was overreacting. But the more he tried to ignore his suspicions, the more they gnawed at him. One fateful night, Marcus's doubts got the better of him. While Ebony was out with friends, he decided to search through her things. He rifled through her drawers, looking for something, anything, to explain the growing distance between them. That's when he found it. A small box hidden in the back of the closet, tucked away under piles of old clothes. Inside, he discovered documents that made his blood run cold. Among various papers was a birth certificate bearing a name Marcus had never seen before: Elijah Davis. Confused, he dug deeper and found medical records dating back years, records detailing Ebony's transition from male to female. Marcus's world stopped. He felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. His hands trembled as the weight of the revelation crashed down on him. The woman he had married, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish, had kept this from him. Ebony had been born male, and she had never told him. For Marcus, it wasn't just a secret. It was a betrayal of everything he believed in, everything he thought their relationship had been built on. His mind raced with a mix of emotions: anger, confusion, heartbreak. How could she have hidden something so important from him? The person he thought he knew felt like a stranger. When Ebony returned home that evening, she was greeted by the sight of Marcus sitting on the edge of their bed, her most intimate secret laid out in plain view. The moment her eyes fell on the documents, her face drained of color. She froze in the doorway, her hand tightening on the doorknob as though she were preparing to run. "You lied to me." Marcus's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with rage. He stood slowly, holding the papers in his hand like evidence of a crime. "Who are you, Ebony?" "No. What are you?" Ebony's heart sank as the reality of the situation hit her. She had always known this day might come, the day when her past would catch up with her. But she never imagined it would happen like this. She had hoped to tell Marcus in her own time, in her own way, but fear of losing him had kept her silent for too long. "Marcus, please," she pleaded, stepping cautiously toward him, her eyes filling with tears. "I was going to tell you. I swear I was. But I didn't know how. I love you. This doesn't change who I am, who we are." But her words only fueled the fire inside Marcus. "Doesn't change who you are? You've been lying to me this whole time, Ebony." His voice grew louder, more frantic, his mind struggling to process the shock. "You tricked me into marrying you. Do you know what you've done? I gave you everything, my love, my loyalty, my life, and this whole time, you've been lying to me about the most basic thing, who you really are." Ebony's tears streamed down her face, but she held her ground, desperate to make him understand. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you, Marcus. You mean everything to me. I thought if you knew, you wouldn't love me anymore." Marcus's face twisted in fury. "You thought right!" He spat the words with venom, his anger spiraling out of control. His mind was a whirlwind of betrayal, disgust, and confusion. The room seemed to close in on him, his once beloved wife now feeling like a complete stranger. The argument grew more intense with every passing minute. Marcus's anger was like a live wire, unpredictable and volatile, while Ebony was trapped between trying to explain herself and fearing what Marcus might do next. She had never seen him like this, so out of control, so full of hate. As Marcus yelled, pacing back and forth across the room, Ebony's heart pounded in her chest. She could see the rage building inside him, and it terrified her. "Marcus, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Just calm down. We can talk about this. I'll answer any questions you have. Just please, don't do anything rash." But Marcus wasn't hearing her anymore. In his mind, everything he had built with her had been a lie, and he couldn't think straight. All he saw was red. His hands clenched into fists, his breath quickened. "Calm down," he barked. "You've been lying to me for years, and you want me to just calm down?" In a blind moment of rage, Marcus stormed into the garage, his eyes landing on a hammer. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, returning to the house with a chilling determination. As Ebony stood frozen in the bedroom, her eyes wide with fear, Marcus approached with the hammer in hand. Without warning, he swung the hammer down with brutal force. Ebony screamed, trying to shield herself, but Marcus was relentless. Blow after blow, he struck her with a terrifying fury, her cries for mercy drowned out by his blind rage. The walls of their home were soon splattered with blood as Marcus continued the savage assault. The brutality of the attack was so severe that detectives later described it as one of the bloodiest crime scenes they had ever encountered. But Marcus didn't stop there. He dragged Ebony's lifeless body into the bathroom, his mind spiraling deeper into madness. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer, the rage taking full control now, any sense of humanity gone. He began to mutilate her body, slashing and cutting with reckless abandon, disfiguring her beyond recognition. By the time the authorities arrived, Ebony's body was barely identifiable. Her face and body were marred by Marcus's unhinged brutality. When the police finally broke through the door, the scene they encountered was nothing short of a nightmare. Blood soaked the walls and floor, and in the middle of the room, Marcus sat, covered in blood, staring blankly at the scene he had created. His expression was one of haunting disbelief and madness, as though he couldn't comprehend the horror he had just unleashed. If you're captivated by this case so far, drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. What do you think really happened? And if you want more deep dives into true crime mysteries like this one, give this video a thumbs up. It helps us bring you more shocking cases just like this. The aftermath of Ebony's murder was nothing short of catastrophic. The once quiet suburban neighborhood in Houston was now a crime scene, swarming with police officers, forensic investigators, and reporters. The air was thick with tension as neighbors gathered outside, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. The house, once a symbol of love and new beginnings, was now a grim reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. When the police arrived, they found Marcus sitting on the blood-soaked floor of the bathroom, his hands and clothes stained with Ebony's blood. His expression was blank, his eyes hollow as if he were in a trance. He made no attempt to resist arrest, offering no explanation for his actions. The officers handcuffed him and led him out of the house, his face a mask of numbness. As he was placed in the back of a patrol car, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. He stared out the window, his mind replaying the events of the night in a horrifying loop. Ebony's body was taken to the medical examiner's office, where an autopsy would later reveal the full extent of the brutality she had endured. The report detailed multiple blunt force trauma injuries from the hammer, as well as deep lacerations and stab wounds from the knife. The crime scene photos were so gruesome that even seasoned detectives struggled to look at them without feeling a sense of dread. The investigation into Ebony's murder was swift but thorough. Detectives interviewed Marcus's family, friends, and co-workers, piecing together a picture of a man who had seemed stable and reliable, but had harbored deep-seated insecurities and a volatile temper. They also spoke to Ebony's friends and clients, who described her as a kind, vibrant woman who had always been open about her struggles and triumphs. Many of them were unaware of her past, but those who knew her well spoke of her courage and resilience. As the details of the case began to emerge, the media descended on Houston, turning the story into a national sensation. News outlets ran headlines like, "Newlywed husband kills wife after discovering her secret," and "Transgender woman murdered in brutal attack." The case sparked heated debates about gender identity, trust in relationships, and the societal pressures that can lead to such tragedies. Social media was flooded with posts about Ebony, with hashtags like #JusticeForEbony and #TransLivesMatter trending across platforms. Marcus's family was devastated by the news. His mother, a devout Christian who had always been proud of her son, struggled to reconcile the man she knew with the monster he had become. "I raised him to be a good man," she told reporters, her voice breaking. "I don't know what went wrong." Marcus's siblings were equally shocked, with one of his brothers admitting, "We never saw this coming. He was always so calm, so in control." Ebony's family, meanwhile, was consumed by grief. Her mother, a strong-willed woman who had supported her daughter through her transition, was inconsolable. "She just wanted to be loved," she said through tears. "She didn't deserve this. No one deserves this." Ebony's friends organized vigils in her honor, lighting candles and sharing stories of her kindness and courage. They also launched a fundraiser to cover her funeral expenses and support transgender advocacy organizations. The trial was a media circus, with every detail of the case scrutinized by the public. Marcus's defense team argued that he had been pushed to the brink by the shock of discovering Ebony's secret, claiming that he had suffered a temporary psychotic break. They presented evidence of his clean criminal record and his reputation as a hard-working, law-abiding citizen. "This is not the man Marcus Johnson truly is," his attorney said during opening statements. "This was a moment of madness, a tragic lapse in judgment." The prosecution, however, painted a very different picture. They argued that Marcus's actions were premeditated and fueled by rage and hatred. They presented the crime scene photos and autopsy report, detailing the sheer brutality of the attack. "This was not a crime of passion," the prosecutor said. "This was a cold-blooded, calculated act of violence. Marcus Johnson didn't just kill Ebony Davis, he destroyed her." The trial lasted for weeks, with both sides calling witnesses to testify. Marcus's co-workers described him as a quiet, reserved man who rarely showed emotion. "He was always focused on his work," one of them said. "I never saw him lose his temper." Ebony's friends, on the other hand, spoke of her warmth and generosity. "She was the kind of person who would give you the shirt off her back," one of her clients said. "She didn't deserve this." One of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Ebony's mother took the stand. She spoke of her daughter's journey, her struggles, and her dreams. "She just wanted to live her truth," she said, her voice trembling. "She wanted to be loved for who she was, and instead, she was murdered by the man who was supposed to protect her." Marcus, for his part, showed little emotion throughout the trial. He sat quietly, his eyes downcast, as the evidence against him was presented. When he took the stand, His voice was barely audible as he recounted the events of that fateful night. "I didn't know what I was doing," he said. I couldn't handle it. I loved her, but I felt like she had betrayed me." The jury deliberated for 3 days before reaching a verdict. When the foreperson stood to announce the decision, the courtroom was silent. "We find the defendant, Marcus Johnson, guilty of first-degree murder." Marcus showed no reaction as the sentence was read. His face, a blank mask of resignation. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict in Marcus Johnson's trial brought a sense of closure to some, but for many, the wounds left by Ebony Davis's murder were far from healed. The case had become a flashpoint for discussions about gender identity, violence against transgender individuals, and the societal pressures that can lead to such tragedies. Ebony's story resonated far beyond Houston, sparking a national conversation about the challenges faced by transgender people, particularly Black trans women, who are disproportionately targeted for violence. In the weeks following the trial, Ebony's friends and supporters organized a series of events to honor her memory. They held candlelight vigils, community forums, and fundraisers to support transgender advocacy organizations. The hashtag #JusticeForEbony continued to trend on social media, with thousands of people sharing their thoughts and experiences. Many used the platform to call for greater protections for transgender individuals and to demand accountability for those who perpetrate violence against them. Ebony's mother, still grieving the loss of her daughter, became an outspoken advocate for transgender rights. She traveled across the country, sharing Ebony's story and speaking out against the discrimination and violence that transgender people face. "My daughter was a beautiful, loving person," she said during one speech. "She didn't deserve to die because of who she was. No one does. We need to do better as a society. We need to protect our trans brothers and sisters." The case also had a profound impact on Marcus's family. His mother, who had always been proud of her son, struggled to come to terms with what he had done. She visited him in prison, hoping to understand what had driven him to such violence. "I raised you to be a good man," she told him during one visit. "How could you do something like this?" Marcus had no answers. He sat in silence, his eyes downcast, as his mother wept. Marcus's siblings, meanwhile, distanced themselves from him. They couldn't reconcile the man they had known with the monster he had become. "He's not our brother anymore," one of them said. "The Marcus we knew died that night along with Ebony." For Marcus, life in prison was a stark contrast to the life he had once known. He spent his days in a small cell, haunted by the memories of what he had done. He avoided contact with other inmates, fearing retaliation. He wrote letters to Ebony's family, apologizing for his actions, but they went unanswered. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote in one letter. "I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The house where the murder had taken place became a symbol of the tragedy. It sat empty for months, its windows boarded up and its yard overgrown. Neighbors avoided it, saying it felt cursed. Eventually, it was sold to a young couple who were unaware of its history. They renovated the house, hoping to erase the memories of what had happened there. But for many in the community, the house would always be a reminder of the horror that had unfolded within its walls. The case also had a lasting impact on the transgender community in Houston and beyond. Many transgender individuals spoke out about the fear and discrimination they faced on a daily basis. "Ebony's story is our story," one activist said during a rally. "We live in fear every day, knowing that we could be next. We need to stand together and fight for our rights. We need to make sure that Ebony's death was not in vain." In the years that followed, Ebony's legacy continued to inspire change. Her story was featured in documentaries, books, and articles, shining a light on the struggles faced by transgender individuals. Her friends and family worked tirelessly to keep her memory alive, organizing annual events in her honor and advocating for policies that would protect transgender people from violence and discrimination. The case also prompted a broader conversation about the role of masculinity and societal expectations in relationships. Many experts pointed to Marcus's rigid beliefs about gender and marriage as a contributing factor to the tragedy. This case is a stark reminder of the dangers of toxic masculinity, one psychologist said. When men are taught that their worth is tied to their ability to control and dominate, it can lead to devastating consequences. For Marcus, the weight of his actions never lifted. He spent his days in prison, reflecting on the choices he had made and the lives he had destroyed. He often thought about Ebony, about the love they had shared, and the future they had lost. "I loved her," he said during one interview, "but I didn't know how to love her the way she deserved. I let my anger and my pride destroy everything." Ebony's story serves as a tragic reminder of the consequences of intolerance and the importance of acceptance. Her life was cut short, but her legacy lives on in the hearts of those who knew her and in the countless lives she touched. She was a woman who dared to live her truth, even in a world that often refused to accept her. And while her death was a devastating loss, it also sparked a movement to create a world where everyone, regardless of their gender identity, can live without fear. This case is just one of many disturbing mysteries we uncover. If you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And if you want more true crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, check out this next video right here. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next.